Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Global Pressures, Local Impact and the Fastener Supply Chain in a Changing World. I'm Simon Wright and I'm going to be the host for today. I'm the Director of Marketing at Optimas for our international division. So to just set the scene briefly, as we've all seen over recent months, global tariff policy shifts combined with economic volatility are creating some serious ripple effects in our supply chains. For industries like ours, where fasteners and C-class components are the silent backbone of production, even modest disruptions can cause some major impacts for us. Today, we're joined by a fantastic panel of experts who will explore how manufacturers and distributors are responding to these challenges. We'll be looking at some practical strategies, some sourcing insights, and how transparent collaboration is becoming the key to resilience. So I'll just introduce the panel to you now. We'll start with Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy and I am Head of Logistics and Trade Compliance here at Optimas.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Graham Bassett. I'm Vice President for Asia Pacific, based in China. My region runs as far west for me as India, as far east as Japan, and then I go down to Singapore and Malaysia. So I see a lot of different countries within my region.
Thanks, Graham.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Cherry, and I'm the Vice President of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Chain for Optimas in North America. Happy to be here with you this morning.
Yeah, greetings, everybody. I'm Jeremy Clark, Vice President of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Chain for the international region. So Adam's counterpart, look after everything else across the globe. Nice to meet you all.
Excellent. Thanks very much, everybody. So now that you've met the panel, just before we dive in, I'm just going to share a few housekeeping notes and set the stage for our conversation. So there is a Q&A session at the end of the webinar session. Feel free to submit those questions at any time throughout the session, and we will get to them at the end. Your questions won't be visible until they've been answered. So nobody else other than the moderator, myself, will be able to see those questions until we start getting through them and then we start answering them. You can submit them with your name or you can submit them anonymously. It's entirely up to you. If we don't get to your question today, as we are time bound and we need to wrap this webinar up within the hour, please feel free to send any additional questions through to engage@optimas.com. And I'll repeat that later on, but it's engage@optimas.com if you want to submit any questions following the webinar. And last note on that before we get going, the session's being recorded and we will have an on-demand version available, which we will send after the event, along with any other supporting materials that come out of the conversation that we have today that could be relevant. So let's kick this off. We're going to take a look at the current trading landscape at the moment. And Adam, we'll start with you. If you could kick this off for us with what are the key global economic and political forces affecting trade today?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So first of all, I just think it's important to kind of take a step back and understand the rate at which these global disruptions are actually taking place. So if you think back 5+ years prior to the COVID pandemic, supply chains were dealing with global geopolitical or macroeconomic events on an annual basis at most, probably. And I think a lot of C-suite levels in most organizations weren't thinking about supply chain as a critical function that are influencing the strategic direction of a company. Supply chains were more behind the scenes, the pick, pack, and ship idea. But in the last 5 years, the rate at which these impacts are occurring has really increased substantially. So causing organizations are now prioritizing supply chain and sourcing decisions for both the short-term and the long-term success of the company. So today there's a number of forces impacting trade. Tariffs are obviously the first to be mentioned. And the impact of tariffs are real, and they do seem to change on a daily or weekly basis. Sitting in the US, I can tell you if you don't like the current reality of tariffs, just wait a week and it's likely to change. So it's really the downstream impacts of tariffs, though, that also need to be monitored globally. There's reactionary shift based on the tariffs in terms of manufacturing from certain countries moving from one country to another, and the tightening of manufacturing and logistics capacity in those countries where production is being moved. Raw material and commodity markets are already reacting to these impacts, such as the US metal market. And then when you add on top of that, some of the geopolitical tensions that continue to exist, the threat of natural disasters and labor disputes, port strikes, and then you have technology disruptors such as artificial intelligence, and the continued emphasis being put on sustainable and ethical sourcing practices. There's really a lot of current forces out there for supply chain executives to navigate.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. So, Jeremy, from your vantage point, what would you see to add to that picture?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Adam. I absolutely echo everything Adam said there. And I think one of the other pieces to remember that links in is that if we look at 2024 in isolation, we saw nearly 70 general elections as well around the world. So all of those played into everything that Adam said there to create, in some parts, some instability, in certain parts of the regions and worlds, kind of would have added to some of the stability that was needed, or certainly help to combat some of the issues, potentially, depending on where those elections took place. So that kind of feeds into a lot of what the teams have had to deal with, and goes back before the pandemic. As Adam said, it isn't just, whilst we tend to think around the most recent events, actually the supply chain teams have been dealing with disruptions on a more frequent occurrence since before the pandemic, managing whether it was just some of the geopolitical stuff that was on the horizon through to kind of all of that disruption through the pandemic and since. And as well, not forgetting climate risks and the sustainability activity that goes on. We've seen, whether it be the Panama Canal water levels or the water levels in the Rhine or extreme temperatures, all of that plays into a lot of that instability that supply chains have had to look at. It's also meant our teams have had to be agile, and some of that agility has meant teams maybe haven't been able to keep up, or individuals have struggled. So again, has added to pressure within the labour markets and potentially within labour turnover, not just within the operators, but also all the way downstream into the manufacturers with that extra pressure that they've had to go on to their operations. So the other one that's led to, and just my last point, just inflation and interest rate risks. And we've seen that certainly across a lot of the geographies over the last 2 years in particular, and some rapid rate rises, and that again adds to that risk that we've seen.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeremy, for adding to that. And I guess that's two very good pictures of what it's like on the supply chain side, but it's also what pressures are our customers seeing, and more specifically, Graham, what pressures are you seeing in your region and your part of the world? We've heard from North America and the Northern Hemisphere on this side, but what about in your part of the world?
Sure. Thanks, Simon. I kind of agree with Adam that this kind of dates back for me to circa 2020. China announced its Made in China 2025 when it said, I don't want to just be the world's factory for commodity. I want to make high-tech products. I want to make EVs. I want to make cars. And I think at that moment, the world realized that China could be quite a threat to some of those traditional high-tech, high-margin, high businesses, top businesses around the globe. And I think the world started to think differently about China in those points. And I think there was a general perception that World Trade Organization probably wouldn't help. And I think that's why we're seeing today that tariffs are being not levied through the WTO anymore. These are individual countries wanting to levy individual tariffs on where they see they need protection, potentially for their domestic businesses. I think the other things that I've seen is, stopping China make investments in overseas companies. So before, China was using investment in either Europe or US to kind of get around that. So I think those loops have been closed. And I think the other important thing was the bringing in of things to do with national security. So where countries could say that national security was impacted, they would be able to stop high-tech companies in China either introducing infrastructure in other parts of the world, or certainly stop them buying and making the latest technology, silicon chips. So, this is countries protecting their preferred industries, their sacred industries, from the potential that China could take over some of those industries.
Excellent. That's a really good perspective to put on things, bringing it into what other pressures are being applied to us through the supply chain through many different formats. And I guess just to wrap this part up, Lucy, is there anything from a compliance and logistics perspective that you'd like to add into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Simon, and absolutely agree with what everyone has discussed already. But from a logistics perspective, we need to consider demand and capacity constraints that are happening. We've had port congestions as a result of these tariff shifts, people trying to move their material and shipping items from different points wherever they can get them to. And that has had a massive impact on the ocean market specifically. Also, we've had to work around the Red Sea issue. That's sort of delayed our transit time. So I think all of those factors together have really impacted, not only from tariffs, but just in general on the ocean market for sure. And it's not as stable as it has been since the pandemic. We've seen, unreliability through the scheduling from different ocean carriers. So that's had a massive impact on our businesses that we see today.
Excellent. Thanks for wrapping that up for us, Lucy. So we've heard a lot there about all the different forces, from tariffs to political impact, climate change, demand, and shipping and logistics impact. So there's certainly an awful lot of points that are creating pressures within the supply chain that we've heard about in that first section. So moving more onto the operational side and what it's like for what are the most pressing operational risks right now for manufacturers and distributors? Jeremy, would you kick that one off for us?
Certainly, thanks, Simon. I think everybody over the last few years have suffered kind of operational risks, and will be different depending on which industry it's sat in and which part of the world you're sat in as well. Because I think some of the points discussed already will have a different pull and push as depending on where you're sat. But I think overall, that change in demand as a result of the issues that we've seen is probably the starting point, and then the requirement to react to that changing demand, both from a supplying the fulfillment point of view, but also for a manufacturer to be able to maintain their manufacturing capacity in their machines, make sure you're kind of keeping up with those demand changes in a way that you can complete the order fulfillment. So I think that supply chain disruption and then leading into that lead time volatility to plan all that in has been kind of some of those biggest risks, because it just has such a knock on. It covers then into Lucy's world, as she says, for, even all the logistics, having to plan those changes and secure capacity when it's been constrained. And then faced with the tariffs in the reverse that we've seen, where kind of, you go to blank sailings and you see all of that. So it's changing in the extremes. And I think operationally that's probably more extreme than we've seen in supply chain worlds for a long time. The other knock on then is certainly some of the operational risks around some of the compliance, the sustainability compliance. So CBAM for Europe, BIS in India, for example, having to react to some of the changes that have been made to legislation to meet those sustainability goals has also caused confusion. It's caused instability in some locations and supply chains, as everybody has to kind of scramble to get up to date, get up to speed, and make sure their supply chains react to those changing requirements. And of course, the other one is those increasing input and operational costs. Managing that. Nobody likes to talk sometimes around the cost and the price, but actually managing those costs is another risk. And operationally, it does add another challenge to organisations that they have to see through.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Jeremy. I guess that's on a supply chain perspective side, but again, bringing this back to the customer view, what sort of operational risks are customers of Optimas or manufacturers and distributors actually seeing in the supply chain, and what flags are being raised at the moment from a customer perspective? If Graham, you could take that one for us.
Yeah, and I think Jeremy touched on it. Is for me, it's the supply chain is reasonably stable. We're suddenly not able. It's not like we're not able to bring parts from US into China or China to US. I think for us, it's mainly been commercial, and it's mainly been how we protect the customer, how we protect ourselves, how we protect the supplier from the tariff, meaning that suddenly we either become uncompetitive or the customer becomes uncompetitive. So I think some of the things that we've done to try and smooth some of that out is bonded warehouses and trying to have a wait and see attitude. Because obviously, if we just go on day one to customers with 125% tariff, and likewise our customers go with 155% tariff, then for sure the world's goods would stop moving. So it's trying to be smart and trying to see how the mood is changing, try and see how the negotiations underwent and the improved communications, and then trying to act in the best interests of all of the parties to mitigate most of that risk, or as much risk as we can.
Excellent. Thanks, Graham. And Adam, from your perspective, from a North American view, what things are being raised from operational side of things?
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Jeremy and Graham mentioned as well. I think it just impacts the overall mission of certain locations within your network as well. So, most networks are set up to involve multiple countries. So you're bringing products across borders internally within how you move goods around, and it can really change the mission of some of those locations within your network, where you, based on recent tariff changes, you may be importing into a different location and setting up a hub in a location that traditionally hasn't been used that way, and that has an impact on space, that has an impact on throughput, that has an impact on labor. And so as you're assessing your network as well at a location level, you have to understand what those capabilities are, really the agility of your network, and where you can shift things and shift the mission of certain buildings as well. That is something that we've seen to kind of combat some of these new costs that are entering the market right now.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. And I guess, Lucy, to bring you in just lastly on this one, Adam just mentioned agility of our network, or a manufacturers and a distributors network. What are you seeing that you have to, what are the pressure points that you see you're having to deal with in your time looking at logistics and compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a trade compliance standpoint, I think being able to be very flexible and understanding the new sort of legislations that are being put in place, documentation is a huge piece around that, and having supply chain due diligence to make sure you're complying with the new rules and anything that's been put in place. That's something that certainly myself and my team have had to adapt to ensure that we're kind of able to keep the goods moving and crossing those borders on time. But of course that can delay, and transit times can be delayed if things are stuck at those borders. So it's really important that we just keep up to date with all of the new legislation that's coming out, and understand what that means to us, and knowing our products and what rules we need to follow to get them across borders.
Excellent. And I think that really is a nice segue into, and we started touching on there a little bit, into proactive and mitigation strategies within the supply chain. So we've talked a lot in the last few minutes about what those challenges are, what the pressures are, what the landscape is. I guess if we take a shift now into what we can do to mitigate some of those risks, what we can do operationally, what we can do practically, etc. And Lucy started touching on there some of the points about getting the mapping and the procedures in place. So if we move this on to the next level, so how can supply chain leaders get ahead of these disruptions? And I'll throw that over to you, Adam, first on that one.
Sure. Yeah, like getting ahead of these disruptions, I think regardless of the type of disruption that we're talking about, the first two things that I always think about are data and communication. So do I have the data that I need to properly identify the risks within my supply chain? So for tariffs today, easy examples would be HTS codes, country of origin data. And then also, do I have the right internal communication framework to be able to make decisions quickly and ensure those decisions are cascaded down through the organization so that everybody's aligned? Things change on an hourly, daily basis with some of these disruptions. So the decision making needs to be quick, and the alignment throughout the organization needs to be solid as well. So I think thinking about setting up a regular cadence with the key decision makers in your organization to discuss how these recent changes may impact your supply chain, align on the mitigation actions that need to take place, and then also a separate cadence down within your team to cascade and align those actions. I also think sales, inventory, and operations planning, SIOP is an extremely valuable tool to utilize within the organization. And it's a really effective communication framework as well, not just during disruptions, but just as an ongoing business practice. And frankly, you don't need to wait for a disruption to happen to ask, do I have the right data? Do I have the right communication pathway within the organization? Those are things that you can put in place before the next disruption occurs.
Excellent, thanks. So now I guess that to follow on from that, Jeremy, what are you seeing from your side?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, to build on what Adam said, kind of sitting around that, one of the key elements then is that communication and that upstream and downstream vendor and customer relationship piece, so that all of those feeders that you're getting into your SIOP processes for your internal data management and communication, actually you're getting it through those relationships as well, not just on a spreadsheet information fed, but building those relationships to get the latest updates. Know what your customers' demands are going to be ahead of time. What are they seeing? What are their inputs? And then similarly, keeping those relationships absolutely solid with your vendor base to know their capacities, know what they're seeing in the market, so that the reaction, the feeders into your SIOP have the best information possible to make those decisions in the right way. And then using technology. So whilst data is great, using, that you could have an army managing that data, but actually using some of the latest AI tools that can get a lot of that data crunch, a lot of the market intelligence for you very, very quickly, are kind of some of the latest methods that we're looking at to get ahead of that curve and provide those feeders with the best information. Whatever we put into the systems, whatever we decide of those SIOPs, the best information we can get to feed in, we know those outputs are going to be solid and we can trust them and the teams can trust them. And it allows us to do more as an organization with our customers to satisfy the demands quickly and, improve the requirements across our customer base. The other element then that all transpires to is when we look at kind of some of the sustainability risks that we've said, certainly some of the carbon improvements and the ESG requirements, actually we can use all of that to build those agendas as well. So not only solving for the disruption risk, and as Adam said, getting ahead of it. So actually disruptions, we already know there's a risk of a disruption ahead of time, but also using it to build on our sustainable procurement plans, for example, to make sure we're delivering them for our end customers, carbon reduction objectives, and operating in a more sustainable manner going forward.
Excellent, thank you for that. I guess we're talking from both sides here, and if I can bring you in, Graham, on this one, is we're hearing what mitigation strategies can go on in the background, very much from a supply chain perspective for managing it, but from a more customer and commercial perspective, what other opportunities are there for manufacturers and OEMs to commercially look to mitigate these risks as well for them?
Yeah, I think what I hear most of all from all of our customers, and I don't think this is China, this will be wherever you go in the globe, is a localization approach. I think before, when we had globalization, then obviously that leaves us open to some of these risks. So we hear a lot that most of our customers say, can you bring the supply chain into country? That is obviously the best proactive way to mitigate the risk. That's not a new thing. That's always been, clearly understood, that if you're importing a part with 26-week lead time, or you're getting it made domestically in country with an 8-week lead time, that means that your supply chain is much more stable and much easier to control. I guess the only risk that I would say of that approach is it doesn't work for everything. Of course, if you've got high value parts that are available in country, then we have managed to do 85% of everything into China, but there will always be parts that are either not made in country, or there'll be parts where customers just want a box. They don't want us to make 10 pallets of it. They just want a box. And what I would say is we need to keep an open mind that there still needs to bring goods in from other countries. And if you've got a box of fasteners that costs $10 and now it costs $11, that's not going to be the end of the world. But if you are looking at high value, high volume parts, then localization is a good way to mitigate that risk.
Excellent. Thanks, Graham. And Lucy, very much compliance plays a role in this as well from a logistics perspective. What sort of other strategies, if we haven't touched on already, play into this?
No, absolutely. I completely agree with everything that's been discussed, but, circling back to knowing the classification, so the HS code, HTS codes that we have for our products, knowing what they are really helps to understand the impact that will have on your landed cost. Origin is a huge one as well. I think that that's something that we must have on our system to be able to give us the data for us to be able to review and kind of look at that and say, okay, we're buying from this region, shipping to this region, what will be the impact of that? As tariffs already exist, they already have, and there are some great free trade agreements out there that you can take advantage of. So looking at where we source from and, our end delivery site will be, that really helps to kind of sort of look around mitigating those kind of risks. But also touching on what Jeremy said, the technology and working with sort of market experts, like for us in trade compliance and logistics, having a really good broker to help you kind of understand what these impacts will be and what tariffs will be applied and what origins. There's some really great tools for visibility now that you can get, and having a broker that you're partnered with that you can share data with really helps to review the kind of impact that it will have. And not only that, looking at your Incoterms as well, that's a really important piece. Who is going to be responsible for these costs, and where does the responsibility start and end during the transaction of where the product's shipping from? So knowing your Incoterms as well, evaluating those and making sure everyone's on the same page is really important.
Excellent. Thanks, Lucy. Unless we've missed anything, I can't see anything from what I've heard from the answers. But if anyone's got anything else they want to chime in before we move on to the next session about what mitigating risk strategies look like, just throw that open and I can see all your faces if everybody else can't. We are live, so no. Go on,
Simon. I would just kind of add like focusing on the future and kind of contingency planning and, being able to expand. We talk about, resilient supply chains or agile supply chains. Like, it's always going to be good for your supply chain to open up new geographic areas of the world to source from, to have multiple options within different categories that you're procuring. Like those things can happen and will actually be a benefit to your supply chain when different types of impacts occur. So those are some of those proactive approaches from a sourcing perspective, actions that you can take now that will help mitigate regardless of the disruption that occurs down the road. So that's just, I think, taking the actions now to mitigate in the future versus reacting to the current disruption that's occurring is a good approach to take.
That's excellent. Thank you for kind of bringing that section home for us, Adam. One of the other things on our list for discussion today is, okay, we've heard a lot about our strategies, or what strategies can be put in place by manufacturers within their supply chain, what those challenges, what the landscape looks like. I guess now we're coming onto the section about, okay, what is the best practice for communication for distributors that are supplying these manufacturers? How should distributors be open and transparent with their communication? So on that side of things, I mean, Adam, while you were the last to talk, we'll carry on with you and keep you in the spotlight. But how should businesses communicate tariff risk with customers?
I would say early and often is how I would frame it. So it's okay to, even as things change on a regular basis, I think it's okay to acknowledge that. I think the consistency and proactiveness of communication with customers and suppliers is important. And I think the key things to communicate are around awareness, risk, and mitigation. So instilling confidence that you're making it a priority. I think the awareness shows that your business has a thorough, detailed understanding of the current landscape for tariffs. The risk part is just clearly demonstrating the impact to your customer's business from the current landscape. And then the mitigation is really, what are the options or the actions that your company's considering to minimize that impact and that risk to the business, both in the short and long term. I do think communicating realistic timelines for these mitigating actions is important, since supply chains can't transform overnight in a lot of cases. So communicate that you understand the current landscape and how it impacts them, and then providing those mitigating strategies with clear timelines. I think that's how you build trust with customers, and the suppliers that I have the highest level of trust in have really demonstrated those three things over the last several months.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. Graham, do you have anything to add to that part?
Yeah, I think Optimus' advantage is that when the tariffs first came in, we had a warehouse full of stock, so there wasn't a need to do anything day one. But obviously, I agree with Adam that the communication part of it has been critical. And what we did with customers is we went through all of our customers and said, you have some supply chain risk on this part in April. What would you like us to do? And I think, with having that communication open and the customers seeing that this was not suddenly going to be, an overnight thing where suddenly they're going to be paying higher prices on everything, and just being able to communicate those shortages. Like I say, even when we bought some of the parts in, when the tariff was still at 125%, we put it into a bonded warehouse until we thought the customers were really going to need the part. And guess what happened? The wait and see approach meant that for all of those parts, the tariff had reduced to 10% by the time we actually took it from the bonded warehouse into our stock to supply to the customer. So again, the customers had the protection of our stock. They had the protection of our knowledge about, where they were going to need parts next. And what I would say is probably the number of parts that we actually bought in during that time was 10 or 15 parts. That's how little our customers were really impacted in that period. Now, obviously, what we need to do now is at the 10%, we're going to assume 10% here to stay for 90 days. is as we've talked about before, is talking to customers about the other solutions, which is can we do the localization, can we do everything, but we have a bit of time on our side to make all of those things available to our customer, like I say, to protect our customer, to protect Optimas, and to protect our suppliers. So that has been the beauty of the way we handled it, but it's all about communication.
Excellent. I think what I've taken away from the last 2 points there is that there's very distinct ways of communicating. One is making sure that everybody within our supply chain, within a customer base, knows what's going on at a broad brush level, but it's equally as important to get into the detail with everybody with personalized communication that is meaningful for their accounts in particular. So there is a need for fast, responsive communication, but also to be very reactive and quick off the mark to get personalized communication and impact assessment going with each individual customer that could be impacted.
Absolutely.
So Jeremy, do you have anything to add to this part?
Yeah, certainly about the key points that they take out. Certainly the communication, those relationships that Adam and Graham mentioned, absolutely key. Along with then, the visibility within your own systems, the agility of your teams and your products. So, things being able to offer multi-sourcing opportunities that we can offer our customers, absolutely key to where we can offer either dual source or the ability to switch sources to be agile, are absolutely key to stay ahead of kind of some of the disruptions or some of the changing impacts that supply chains and sourcing teams are seeing currently. And the other thing, it goes beyond tariffs. So maintaining that kind of approach through, whether it be CBAM, so recording and the reporting out of our carbon data to our customers that they would require potentially for their movement of goods, falls into the same kind of agility and communication and information flows. There's a number of legislations coming out over the next couple of years as well that again feed into as part of that ESG strategy to ensure that we're communicating with the customers where we need to make product changes or influencing product changes, communicating that has happened and how we can support them with those changes as well, and providing that information that they require for their reporting as well. Absolutely key.
So as we wrap this up, I'd just like to thank again our panel of experts that have helped us navigate our way through talking about risks and mitigating risks within the supply chain. Please remember that if you do have any questions that we didn't either get to today during this session or something you think of afterwards, then please do email those through to engage@optimas.com. That's engage@optimas.com, and we will do our best to get one of the team to come back to you with an answer. We will be following up with a full recording of this, as mentioned at the start. Some additional resources will be included in there. And if anyone wants to talk to us any further about mitigating risk in supply chain, then use the same email address or reply to the email that we send out to you, and we'd be happy to help you and assist where we can. So on behalf of Optimas, we appreciate your time and engagement in joining us today on the webinar. Let's all stay resilient in those supply chains and let's stay connected. Thank you very much. Goodbye.